Hello everyone, welcome to High Tech Study Plus. In today's video, we are going to discuss about the role of women. Did women have a revolution? This is the part 4 of our video on the French Revolution. Now, from the very beginning, women were active participants in the events, and they hoped that through this involvement as active participants, they would pressurize the revolutionary government to introduce measures to improve their lives. Most of the women of the third estate had to work for a living, and most of the women did not have access to education or job training. Only daughters of nobles and wealthier members of the third estates sent their girls to convent, and after that their families arranged a marriage for them. Working women had to care for their families, and their wages were also lower than that of men. Now, to discuss and voice their interests, what are their interests, they started political clubs and newspaper of their own, and many women's club, about 60 women's club, came up in different French cities, and the most famous among them was the Society of Revolutionary and Republican Women, and their main demand was same political rights for women. In the last part of our video, we had discussed that only men had the right to vote, but women wanted the right to vote, as well as they also wanted to hold political office, and through this they wanted their interests to be represented in the new government. Now, during the early years, the revolutionary government, it introduced laws to improve the lives of the women. Many state schools were created. Schooling was made compulsory for all girls. Marriage was made into a contract, entered into freely and registered under civil law. Divorce was made legal, and apart from this, both men and women could apply for divorce. Women were trained for jobs. They could now become artists or run small businesses. Now, women's struggle for equal political rights, however, continued. During the Reign of Terror, the period from 1793 to 1794 is known as the Reign of Terror, and we had discussed about this in the last part of our video. During this period, the new government issued laws ordering the closure of women's clubs, and it also banned political activities. Prominent women were arrested and a number of them were executed. Women's movement for voting rights and equal wages did not stop here. It continued through the next 200 years in many countries of the world. Finally, the fight for the vote was carried out through an international suffrage movement, and the example of the political activities of French women during the revolutionary years was kept alive as an inspiring memory. Finally, it was in the year 1946 that women in France got the right to vote. Now, let us discuss about slavery and its abolition. One of the most revolutionary reforms during the Jacobin regime was the abolition of slavery in the French colonies. Now, the colonies in the Caribbean were very important suppliers of commodities like tobacco, indigo, sugar and coffee, but the Europeans were reluctant to go and work in such distant and unfamiliar lands, due to which there was shortage of labor on these plantations. So this was met by a triangular slave trade. Let us understand the triangular slave trade through a flowchart. The French merchants, they bought slaves from local chieftains of the African coast. This Slaves were branded and shackled. They were tightly packed into ships for the 3-month-long voyage across the Atlantic Ocean to the Caribbean, and in the Caribbean they were sold to the plantation workers. They worked in this plantation, and the products like sugar, coffee, indigo, etc. were sent to European markets for selling. So this was the triangular slave trade that existed during that point of time, and various port cities like Bordeaux and Nantes owed their economic prosperity to the flourishing slave trade. During the 18th century, there was little criticism of slavery in France. The National Assembly had long debates on abolishing this in the French colonies, but no laws were passed, fearing opposition from the businessmen whose income depended on slave trade. The convention in 1794 legislated to free all slaves, but this was just a short term measure. Why? Because Napoleon reintroduced slavery 10 years later. Finally, it was abolished in all the French colonies in the year 1848. Now let us discuss about the revolution and everyday life. Everyday life refers to the kind of life people lead every day. Now, in the years following 1789, there were certain changes in the lives of man, women as well as children. The revolutionary government took upon themselves to pass laws that would translate the ideas of liberty and equality to everyday life. How these ideas will be available to everyone every day. There were certain important laws that came into effect soon after the storming of the Bastille in 1789, and this was the abolition of censorship. Now, as per the old regime, all the written material and cultural activities could be performed only after it had got approval from the censors of the king. Now, as per the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen, there was freedom of speech and expression, and this was a natural right of the citizen. Newspapers, pamphlets, books and printed pictures, these all things, they described and discussed the events and changes in France. These things, they flooded the towns of France, and from these towns they moved to the countryside. Freedom of press also meant that opposing views of the events could be expressed. Now, apart from this, there were plays, there were songs, there were festive processions that attracted a large number of people. Now, in the year 1804, Napoleon Bonaparte crowned himself as the Emperor of France, and he set out to conquer the neighboring European countries, and there he started dispossessing the dynasties and creating kingdoms where he placed the members of his family. Now, certain laws were also passed during his reign, and these were the protection of private property, uniform system of weights and measures provided by decimal system, and initially he was seen as a liberator, but the Napoleonic armies soon came to be viewed everywhere as an invading force, and he was finally defeated at Waterloo in the year 1815. In 1804, he crowned himself as the emperor. In 1815, he got defeated at Waterloo. Many of his measures that carried the revolutionary ideas of liberty and modern laws to other parts of Europe had an impact on people long after Napoleon had left. The ideas of liberty and democratic rights were the most important legacy of the French Revolution. This spread from France to rest of the Europe, and due to this the feudal systems were abolished. The colonized people, they revoked on the idea of freedom from the bondage and creating a sovereign nation state. Tipu Sultan and Raja Ram Mohan Roy also responded to these ideas coming from the revolutionary France. With this, we complete the chapter. Thank you.
And if you want us to make a video on any specific topic of class 9th and 10th, then do share it in the comment section.